Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Blade, and I'm the editor, creator, and producer of what you're watching right now, Blade Talk. If you are new here, welcome, and you found this presentation helpful, informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. So, I recently did two presentations about the Bible, right? And that sparked a lot of different questions about other religious books, the Bhagavad Gita's, Buddhist scriptures, the Quran, people just trying to pick my brain, right? I minored in theology at UT Martin. I'm also a student of comparative religion. So I've read the Quran, and I found personally errors within it. Right? As much as Muslims like to claim that the Quran has no errors, personally, I found a few that I haven't heard any explanation on, at least worthy of satisfaction. So I'm going to list them here in this presentation. Let's begin. All right, so before we get started today, I want to draw a caveat, right? And that is, I don't do this to bash Christians or bash Muslims, right? I have no interest in offending anyone, etc. What I am trying to do is educate my fellow Jews. Okay, because from what I have found, being Jewish, Christians and Muslims spend an enormous amount of time and money and resources proselytizing, right? And when they do, a lot of the times they target Jews, Christianity more specifically, right? Because the bottom line is, between Christians and Muslims, they pretty much are set in their ways, most of them, and they don't even want to hear the other person's arguments. Christians say Jesus is the last and final messenger. Muslims claim that Muhammad is the last and final messenger. So there's very little wiggle room, between the two. But as far as Jews, I'm talking about the Abrahamic religions, it's as if they are specifically targeting us, right? And I'm an open-minded person, right? And so I've heard Muslims claim that if you just read the Quran and the hadith that goes with it, you will have the solution for humanity, right? You will convert to Islam like that, right? Similarly, I've heard the same thing on the Christian end of the spectrum, right? If you pray, if you read the New Testament and you pray and let Jesus come into your life, you will convert immediately, just like Paul did on the road to Damascus. Well, I hate to disappoint everyone, but I've read it and I didn't get that at all. I went over the errors that I found in the New Testament, making up prophecies, trying to force Jesus in when he doesn't fit, right? And the Quran does something that I do like. And what it is it doesn't try to claim that it is the fulfillment of another religion. You see, Christianity, you read the book of Matthew, Luke, the Gospels, and, some of Paul's writings, it always claims that such and such was done so that a prophecy would be fulfilled. And that prophecy is according to the Hebrew scriptures. Again, they're trying to force Jesus in. So they're making up prophecies, they're misapplying prophecies, misquoting prophecies, doing whatever they have to do in order to shoehorn Jesus in. Islam doesn't do that. The Quran doesn't do that, right? So I give kudos to the Quran. They believe that, Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah, translated Christ, Isa, as they call him, because the Quran says so. Not because, you can find any kind of reference in the Hebrew scriptures of this being fulfilled and that. The Quran says it, so Muslims, they agree with it, right? So I like that. But be that as it may, I have found errors in the Quran as well, right? And though the Quran doesn't mention that this prophecy was fulfilled, that prophecy was fulfilled, it is interesting to note that Muslims make that claim. So whereas the New Testament in the Bible itself tries to claim that certain prophecies were fulfilled according to the Hebrew scriptures, the Quran doesn't, but Muslims like to attribute Muhammad to certain prophecies. One that they love to cite is Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, right? They say that this is a prophecy speaking about Muhammad. Let's read it together. I will raise them up a prophet from among you, their brothers, like to you, and I will put my words in his mouth. So Muslims like to claim that this passage is about Muhammad, right? Until you essentially go to the context, you find out what it's actually speaking about. The book of Deuteronomy is the last book of the 5 books of Moses. It is Moses pretty much his farewell, right? Because he's not going to be allowed to go into the promised land. And as you can imagine, the Jews have depended on Moses in the desert up to this time. So of course they were naturally afraid of losing him, right? Who's going to guide us? What will we do? Etc., etc. And Moses basically states that God has said, don't do what the other nations do. And don't worry, I'll raise up another prophet from among your brethren, from among the Israelites. And I will put my words in his mouth, and you shall do everything that he commands you to do. So it's essentially comforting the Israelites, comforting the Jewish people that God is going to raise up prophets for you. This isn't talking about one specific individual. It's talking about prophecy in general. God is basically saying, I'm not going to leave you alone. Once Moses dies, I'm going to raise up another prophet and then another prophet, and I'm going to be with you, and I'll send raise people up from among you to guide you. Now, Muhammad doesn't fit this bill, right? He wasn't Jewish. And if you look and pay attention to what Muhammad taught, it is not in line with what the Torah actually states, right? Then there's another passage that Muslims like to claim. It is Isaiah chapter 29, verse 12. Okay. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray you. And he will say, I am not learned. So obviously, Muslims like this passage because it's talking about an illiterate person. Or is it? If we go to the context, you'll understand more of what the prophet is saying. Okay. In context, one must remember that Isaiah lived in the 8th century BCE, okay? Isaiah chapter 29 is in a context in which God pronounces woes on Judah for its sins at the time, okay? The context indicates that within that year, the great Assyrian king would lay siege to Jerusalem. Okay, Jerusalem will be attacked by its enemies and punished for its crimes against God. Jews were in a state of deliberate spiritual blindness. Okay, and Judah's false prophets, seers were not helping the situation. That's what verse 9 and 10 is about. Notice that Isaiah then described the unwillingness of the people of his day to heed the truth by comparing them to a literate person who is told to read something but refuses, excusing himself by saying the document is sealed, verse 11. It is then delivered to an illiterate person, but he excuses himself by saying he cannot read, verse 12. Okay? The point is that the people of Isaiah's day refused to pay attention to God's word. Okay? They did not want it. The stubbornness of the Jewish people, they did not want to heed the word of God. Okay? Verses 13 through 16 explain that because of their closed minds, they would all suffer for the rejection of his words. The Assyrians arrived and besieged the city, right? But as usual, God revealed that a better day would come, and when people would listen, this is verse 17, and, people would be more open-minded, right? But at that time, Isaiah is basically saying that the Jews of his day were so stubborn, they didn't even want to heed the words of God. So they were making excuses. It's sealed. I can't read. I'm blind. Whatever the case may be. That's how stubborn Jews had become. But of course, it mentions someone that can't read. So Muslims cherry pick and say, oh, well, because Muhammad was illiterate, this must be about Muhammad. But as we've examined the context, it is transparently evident that these verses have absolutely nothing to do with Muhammad. Absolutely nothing. Another one that Muslims like to cite is the Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16, as a prophecy about Muhammad. Let's read it together. His mouth is most sweet. Yes, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Now, Muslims suffer the same thing that Christians do. They cherry pick and pull things out of context. The Song of Solomon chapter 5 is a love letter. It is poetry and describing a relationship between King Solomon and his bride-to-be. But Muslims love this passage because if you translate it, altogether lovely is Muhammadin, right? So they love the fact that it's, that sounds like Muhammad, right? Altogether lovely translated Muhammadin. So it sounds like Muhammad. And so they apply it. But you got to be pretty desperate to go into someone's love letter and think that it's talking about the last and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, right? I digress. Then, of course, Muslims like to claim that the Torah has been corrupted, even though there is little evidence of this, okay? In fact, the Quran states that the Torah contains the will of Allah. And no one can change Allah's words. As a matter of fact, the Quran doesn't even say that the Torah has been corrupted at all. The Muslims are essentially painting that narrative. They're making it up. And they have to justify their own religion. The same thing that the Christians do. If the Torah, which I believe is intact the way that it is, then Christians and Muslims have a huge problem. Because if the Torah is true, then there's no need for the New Testament. There's no need for the Quran. So of course you have to say things like it's been corrupted. It's not accurate. Some Muslims will say, well, it was meant for a certain time period and a certain group of people, etc., etc. But the Torah in itself doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say that it's only meant for a specific time. On the contrary, it states that you shall follow this throughout your generations. It is an everlasting covenant. This is an everlasting law for all the day. There's constantly hints that this is eternal. But of course, to justify Christianity and to justify Islam, you have to come up with a reason that why should I listen to you instead of the first thing that God revealed to us? Oh, that's old, right? But if it's God's words, it should stand the test of time. It's been corrupted. Funny thing is that the Torah scroll, regardless to whatever synagogue you choose to go into, Reform, Orthodox, Hasidic, Conservative, whatever Karaite, whatever synagogue you want to go to, the Torah scroll is always the exact same. It is the same. The commentary may be different in the Chumash, but the Torah scroll is always the same. And if we compare it to the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran, we find that there has been very, very little changes. As a matter of fact, there was only one book that wasn't found, and that was the Book of Esther in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The rest of it is almost word for word. So, when was the Torah corrupted? And if it has been, then how is it that all of our Torah scrolls read the same all over the world? And which part has been corrupted? See, if you actually read the Torah, and the laws there that are in it, it states, honor your mother and your father. That's been corrupted. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's been corrupted. Don't steal. That's been corrupted. Don't murder. That's been corrupted. Don't commit adultery. That's been corrupted. What did it say before then? Interesting. Now let's look at the scientific errors that I found. The Quran states that stars are missiles thrown at the devils. Apparently, Muhammad believed that devils try to snatch secret knowledge from the heavens and bring it to the soothsayers. Shooting stars were made to shoot those devils. This is just silly. Okay, it's almost comical. All right. Now, the Hadith tries to say that these are the shooting stars, right? But shooting stars, we know, are not actually stars, right? They are meteoroids and are made from a completely different nature, such as comets and asteroids, right? They enter our atmosphere and burn and light up, looking like stars to our eyes, but they're not actually stars. Another one, the Quran states that it is not allowable for the sun to reach the moon, nor does the night overtake the day. Now, in reality, the sun and the moon move independently from one another, right? On the contrary, the moon can occasionally get between the sun and the earth, and we call this a solar eclipse. Another one, the Quran states that the sun and the moon will join at the end of times. That is a very weird thing to say, because even if the moon was hypothetically shot out of Earth's orbit, okay, even if I grant that premise, it would take a long time to reach the sun. Moreover, it would probably burn and be destroyed before it ever reached the sun. So the idea that the two are going to come together is not probable at all. The moon will burst into flames and become nothing by the time it even got close to the sun. All right? And even if it did, it would be like a fly colliding with us. The Quran also states that the moon will darken before it joins the sun. Someone should tell the eternal author of the Quran that the moon is already dark. Okay, it only becomes bright because the sun shines on it and the sunlight reflects the surface of the moon, which gives us light at night, right? Even if I grant the premise of this verse that it could happen, it would make no sense. If the moon was headed towards the sun to collide with it, then it wouldn't get darker. It would become brighter as it moves towards the sun. It would reflect the sunlight until it finally burst into flames and, again, probably wouldn't make it to the sun to begin with, right? The Quran states that the moon was split in two as a sign of the end times. It has been 1400 plus years, okay? And we haven't seen the end of the world yet. Also, the moon was never split in two, okay? Such an event would have been seen by the entire world, okay? No one, not the Romans, the Persians, the Chinese, the Indians, etc., ever wrote anything like this event taking place down. Ever. There's no record of it. Some Muslims have claimed that NASA took photos of the moon and saw a rift, which proves this. But NASA respectfully debunked this by showing more rifts and saying you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet. Now let's talk about false prophecies that Muhammad made, okay? Muhammad stated that Constantinople will be conquered and the last hour will come. Well, indeed, Constantinople was conquered in 1453 by the Ottoman Empire and is now called Istanbul, okay? The world is still spinning, though. Where is the last hour? Moving on, Muhammad was asked when the last hour will be. He sat quietly and then looked at a young boy and said, if this boy lives, he would not grow very old till the last hour would come to you. Pretty sure that boy grew up, got old, and the world is still spinning. Muhammad prophesied that no one on earth that night will be living after the completion of 100 years from that night. There are various ways to interpret this. Muslim apologists like to say that it meant no one would grow to the age of 100, right? But in context, this doesn't work. It states that no living thing on the earth's surface will be alive after the completion of 100 years, okay? Now, this includes animals. You really believe that nothing survived 100 years from that night? This was essentially a doomsday prophecy. And I believe Islam itself, it was started out as a doomsday cult. You know, talking about the last hour, you know, when people would ask Muhammad about the last hour, he would hold up two fingers like this, indicating that the last and final messenger was sent right before the last hour. The two were back to back, right? It was kind of a package deal, right? So, yeah, it's more of a doomsday religion that essentially failed because, again, as I've stated, the world is still spinning, right? So let's discuss the crazy things that Muhammad stated, okay? A woman coming to him and stating her sister has measles. She was set to get married and her hair had fallen out. The woman asked Muhammad, can she put extensions in her hair? Muhammad stated that Allah has cursed the one who does hair extensions and the one who has that done. Muhammad gained a lot of followers, right? Now some may ask, how was that possible? Muslims will say that, well, Muhammad was an exceptional human being, right? He personified what being a good human being is supposed to look like, right? Instilled with morals, values, etc. But from what I've read, he promised his male followers 72 virgins once they got to heaven with big breasts and big eyes. He also didn't like dogs. Okay. One time the angel Gabriel didn't visit him with a revelation because there was a dog in the house. You really have to ask yourself, why does the Torah need a sequel? Why does the Torah need a sequel? The dozens of versions of the Bible and the Quran that Muslims have that has the solutions for all of humanity. Why does God need to keep sending new revelations? What was wrong with the first one? What was so wrong with it? Right? In my study of Islam, I found that Muhammad was a trader, and that was his job. He traded goods, right? And along the way, he heard stories. Now some people would say that he plagiarized the Quran and whatnot. And I believe some of it may be true. You hear stories about, on the road to, trading and whatnot, and you pass it down to Arabs that were pagans at the time, and the thing is up and running, right? For example, a lot of Muslims like to claim that, the Quran is the only religious book on the face of the planet that has the saying, if you save someone's life, it is though you have saved all of humanity. And if you kill someone, unless it be for murder or corruption in the land, it is though you have killed all of humanity. But that was taken from the Jewish oral tradition. That's in the Talmud that essentially predates Islam. So you really got to wonder, where did Muhammad come up with that to write it in the Quran? All right? I mean, these ideas about Jesus and who he was, right? Which is another reason, of course, I can't get on board with Islam, and what Muhammad taught, because you're pretty much instigating or influencing a false prophet, a false Messiah. But nevertheless, there was already stories about Jesus speaking from the womb, and all of these stories are already circulating around. People putting their own spin on, things that they had heard about Jesus. And Muhammad, when he originally got his revelations, didn't know whether his revelations were coming from God or whether they were coming from the devil. He actually got fooled. It's in the Quran. He actually got fooled and did something and disobeyed Allah and got tricked by the devil. Muhammad stated certain things, that men would come and ask him after a war, what shall we do? Can we have sex with the women that are slaves? And Muhammad would go somewhere and pray and then come back, and he basically told the men that, yeah, it's fine. You can have sex with the female slaves, the female captives. Which, if you translate it, that's basically rape. Right? It seems like for every question, Muhammad went and asked God, and God validates whatever it is that Muhammad wanted. The Quran states that you are to marry women in twos, threes, and fours, but if you can't do justice, marry only one. But Muhammad, because he was the last and final messenger, had 11, 12 wives, violating his own law. But when you call him on it, and according to the Quran, chapter 33, verse 50, when you call him on it, Allah said it was okay to marry, a 6-year-old girl. Allah said it was okay. And the goalpost keeps shifting. Everything that Muhammad does Allah is okay with it. But again, you really have to have a lot of faith in Muhammad that he had those revelations. Because he didn't even trust himself. After receiving the revelations, he became suicidal. What prophet do you know became suicidal after hearing God? He tried to hurl himself off of a cliff. Then you can't tell where your revelations are coming from, whether God or the devil. So my big thing is, after reading the New Testament, reading the Quran, it's hard to even nail down which one is true. The different versions of the Holy Bible. Which one is the most accurate? Because the Protestants don't all have the same Bible. The Catholics don't have the same Bible that the Protestants do. The Mormons don't have the same Bible that the Catholics nor the Protestants do. And the Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the same Bible that the Mormons or the Protestants or the Catholics do. And when it comes to Islam, Muhammad didn't walk around with a book. He was illiterate. Muslims will be proud to tell you that. But he had a scribe. And those scribes wrote down things as he dictated them. Right? So, after Muhammad died, they just compiled a bunch of notes together and came up with the Quran. That's why if you read the Quran outright, if you just purchase a book, it is completely jumbled. You can't read it straight because it's just a bunch of notes and whatnot that those scribes wrote down. And for all this talk about how the Quran can't be corrupted and whatnot, keep in mind that the third caliph, Uthman, ordered all the Qurans to him, and he decided on one Quran and he burned the rest because people were adding, subtracting, etc. One hadith even states that a goat ate one of the pages of the Quran. So you have to ask yourself, what was on that page that the goat ate? So how can you trust it? What were in those other Qurans that Uthman burned? And what makes you so sure that Uthman had the right Quran? He wasn't a prophet. And God didn't order him to do that. So what gave him that right? The same way I ask Christians, when Christians come and you throw out entire verses and books and chapters and you manipulate this. Now there's the Queen James version of the Bible and whatnot. Who told you, what prophet came and told you that you could do all that and you could tamper with the word of God? And that's the same thing that I asked the Muslims. When Uthman decided to burn all the other Qurans, on whose authority? Because it's a known fact that Muhammad didn't name a successor. That was the whole split between the Sunni and the Shia. There was no successor that he named. So therein lies the issue that I found with both religions. When Jesus died, he didn't really name a successor. So some followed the disciples of Peter and others followed Paul. When Muhammad died, it was unclear who his successor would be. But in Judaism, Moses knew he wouldn't go into the promised land. God told him. And so Moses named his successor, so there was no confusion. It was Joshua. There was no confusion. And the Jewish people followed Joshua into the promised land. So you really have to have a lot of faith in order to follow Christianity and Islam. And again, I'm not looking to bash or offend anyone. They just try so hard to convert me as a Jew. Right? But when I look at their scriptures, you need the Holy Spirit in order to grasp the New Testament. You need the Hadith to really understand the Quran. And I say, okay, fine. But then what happens if it still doesn't make sense? And the biggest kicker with those two religions is there's a penalty if you don't accept it. So, if you don't accept Christianity, you know what awaits you. Hellfire, right? And if you don't accept Islam, you know what awaits you. Hellfire. You get punished. Meanwhile, Judaism teaches that you can be a righteous non-Jew. You don't have to be Jewish. I'm not on this platform saying you need to become Jewish. Just follow the 7 laws of Noah, and you can be righteous. Don't murder, don't steal. Just follow the basic laws, and you can be a righteous person in God's eyes. So what new thing has Christianity brought? What new thing has Islam brought in terms of ethics, morality? Right? I don't see it. I mean, they like to claim that they have something new. The gospel is the good news. What new thing can you teach me? That I all of a sudden am unworthy and I need Jesus to intervene on my behalf because I'm just so not worthy of talking to God directly? That only works on people with low self-esteem. And that's what I try to get people to understand on this channel. They think that God is so vast and he wouldn't care about me. I'm just one person out of, 7 billion people. He probably isn't paying attention to me and whatnot. So they feel like they need some kind of mediator or go-between to interject on their behalf. And that's the beauty of God, is that you don't need anyone to intervene on your behalf. That's the beauty. That out of all the people in the world, God created you for a special purpose, and there's no one on this earth that is exactly like you. And he wants that relationship with you. And when it comes to Muslims, they imitate Muhammad so much it's almost as if they worship him. You got to live like Muhammad. You got to love Muhammad more than your wife, your children. You got to die for Muhammad. You got to do this and this and this. And it almost makes Muhammad out to be a deity. That you got to go that far. But I honestly call out the hypocrisy with Muslims. Because Muslims are supposed to acknowledge all the prophets. But what's interesting is they only really acknowledge Muhammad. Now, many will say that, no, we believe in Jesus. And then if that is the case, when you see The Simpsons or these other cartoon shows or whatever making fun of the other prophets, where's your outrage then? Because we know that if anyone depicts or draws or comes up with a movie or a cartoon about Muhammad, we know Muslims will vehemently protest that whatever that cartoon, that movie is. But you won't do the same when it's Jesus. You won't do the same when it's Noah, when it's Moses. So the hypocrisy. Let alone that if you join Islam, it is for life. And if you try to leave, they'll kill you. See, that's something that I can't get on board with. If you try to leave, they will kill you. You have to pay with your life. And if you have a child and they choose to leave Islam, they get disowned. The parents won't have anything to do with them because that's the stage that Muhammad set. I think that Islam started as a doomsday cult. The last and final messenger, and then right after that, the last hour, the end of the world. He made many prophecies alluding to the last hour, but it never came. And the way that they treat non-Jews, you got to pay the jizya, which is a heavy tax. The forced conversions, the way that, Muhammad was a military tyrant. He used the military and, to bend at his will. And of course, nobody's going to challenge you when you have that kind of military power. And then every time you go and pray, Allah is seemingly on your side. So you can pretty much do what you want. Marry 6-year-olds. Marry your adopted son's wife. You can do what you want. And nobody's going to challenge you because you have a massive army behind you that you promised them that when you get to heaven, they're going to get a bunch of virgins. But what do the women get? So, after reading the Quran, like I said, I am happy that it doesn't try to force and this prophecy was fulfilled in the Jewish scriptures, and it doesn't do that. But Muslims like to claim. They like to claim things that aren't in the Quran. The Torah is corrupted. The Quran doesn't say that. The Torah was meant for, people, for a certain time limit and, just for that time. The Torah nor the Quran says that. So they're just coming up with these things on their own. And the way that prophets are so elevated in Christianity and Islam, I don't understand it. Jesus, you got to love Jesus and you got to hate everyone else and put Jesus before everyone. I don't remember Isaiah saying that. Jeremiah is saying that. It's not about that prophet. It's about bringing people back to God and what he wants, not the prophet himself. Muhammad, you got to love Muhammad, and if anybody disrespects Muhammad, you got to do this, and you got to love Muhammad and die for Muhammad and this, that, and the other. I thought it was about God. You're elevating these prophets to another level. You got to imitate the prophet. You got to do this, and you got to eat like the prophet, pray like the prophet, live like the, etc., etc. It's very interesting how they choose to imitate another man. But these are the errors that I personally found in the Quran. A lot of it has to do with astrology, and there was just some things that are patently obvious. I watched a video not long ago about, surprising facts that the Quran mentioned. And one of the surprising miracles, get ready for it, all living things on earth are made up of water. Wow. Who could have guessed that, right? Who could have guessed? The Quran states that being in the desert, who would have guessed that every living creature is made up of water and cells are made up of water? Who could have guessed that? And Muslims like to pass this off as if it's a shocking revelation. Who could have guessed that? But if you do a quick Google search, there were many civilizations that thought this. It's not as shocking as Muslims think that it is. In conclusion, again, I just personally don't believe that the Torah needs a sequel. It is fine just the way it is. It states this is an everlasting, covenant. Teach your children, your children's children, throughout your generations, forever. There's no evidence that has been tampered with or corrupted. Again, even if it had been, even if I grant the premise, then you got to explain why every Torah scroll and every synagogue are the exact same. They are the exact same. So if it's been tampered with or corrupted, wouldn't they have different Torah scrolls? And the way that Muslims, of course, believe in Jesus as being the Messiah, when he did not fulfill any of the messianic prophecies. There's no peace on earth. There's no third temple. All the ingathering of the Jews, etc., etc. So, if you found this presentation helpful and informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Blade Talk. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and just think for yourselves, right? People come on this platform and, they want to criticize me for, what I perceive and what I got from the Quran and the New Testament. You need to talk to this person. You need to debate this person. And if you talk to Dr. such and such, that is a clear sign that that person is in a cult and they're only Muslim or Christian because their parents are Muslims and Christians. They have no idea what they're talking about when they can't attack the arguments that I present, and instead they attacked my character. It's about the power of the message, not the image of the messenger. Thank you all so much. And until the next episode, you all take care.